A Long Walk to Water, Chapter 5. Southern Sudan today. There is a big lake 3 days' walk from Naya's village. Every year when the rain stopped and the pond near the village dried up, Naya's family moved from their home to a camp near the big lake. Naya's family did not live by the lake all year because of the fighting. Her tribe, the Nuer, often fought with the rival Dinka tribe over the land surrounding the lake. Men and boys were hurt and even killed when the two groups clashed. So Naya and the rest of her village lived at the lake only during the 5 months of the dry season, when both tribes were so busy struggling for survival that fighting occurred far less often. Like the pond back home, the lake was dried up, but because it was much bigger than the pond, the clay of the lake bed still held water. So I want you to listen very carefully here about how Naya gets water now. Naya's job at the lake camp was the same as at home, to fetch water. With her hands, she would dig a hole in the damp clay of the lake bed. She kept digging, scooping out handfuls of clay, as her arm was long. Clay got wetter as she dug, until at last water began to seep into the bottom of the hole. The water that filled the hole was filthy, more mud than liquid, and it seeped in so slowly that it took a long time to collect even a few gourds full. Naya would crouch by the hole waiting for water, here for hours at a time, and every day for 5 long months, until the rains came and she and her family could return home. I almost feel like this is worse than having to walk to the water. It sounds like hours of waiting and digging in the dirt for water. If you've ever been to the beach before and dug deep in the sand, you'd notice that the water starts to come in through the bottom, and that's what they're talking about here. I also want you to notice that Naya is a member of the Nuer tribe, where we know the Nuer tribe, or the Dinka tribe. And we know the Nuer and the Dinka have been fighting. Granted, Naya is growing up today and Salva is growing up in 1985. Southern Sudan, 1985. Salva's eye was swollen shut. Buska's forearms were lumpy and raw. A friend of Buska's had a fat lip. They all looked as though they had been in a terrible fist fight. If you remember, they found something yesterday. But their injuries weren't bruises, they were bee stings. A fire had been started under the tree to smoke the bees out of the hive and make them sleepy. But as Buska and the other Jakal men were removing the hive from the tree, the bees woke up and were not happy at all to discover that their home was being taken away. They expressed their unhappiness very clearly by buzzing, swarming, and stinging a lot. It was worth it, Salva thought as he touched his eye gingerly. His belly was a rounded lump stuffed full of honey and beeswax. Nothing had ever tasted so good as those pieces of honeycomb dripping with rich, luscious gold sweetness. Along with everyone else in the group, he had eaten as much as he could, and then a little more. All around him, people were licking their fingers in great satisfaction, except for one Dinka man who had been stung on his tongue. It was swollen so badly that he couldn't close his mouth. He could hardly swallow. Salva felt very sorry for him. The poor man couldn't even enjoy the honey. If you've ever had real honeycomb before, it's much different than honey that you get from the bear. It is a little bit waxy. You can chew on the wax after you're done eating the honey. And it's a little bit more bitter than the typical honey that you get from the bear, which comes from a flower. The walking seemed easier now that Salva had something in his belly. He'd managed to save one last piece of honeycomb and wrapped it carefully into the honeycomb, and at the end of the next day, all the honey was gone. But Salva kept the beeswax in his mouth and chewed it for the memory of the sweetness. The group got a little bigger with each passing day. More people joined them. People who'd been walking alone or in little clusters of 2 or 3. Salva made it a habit to survey the whole group every morning and evening, searching for his family, but they were never among the newcomers. I think he's pretty determined here. We talked about that trait of him being determined to find his family. One evening, a few weeks after Salva had joined the group, he made his usual walk around the fireside, scanning every face in hope of seeing a familiar one. Then, ouch! Salva almost lost his footing as the ground underneath him seemed to move. A boy jumped to his feet and stood in front of him. "Hey, that was my hand you stepped on." The boy spoke Dinka, but with a different accent, which meant that he was not from the area surrounding Salva's village. Salva took a step back. "Sorry, are you hurt?" Then the boy opened and closed his hand a few times and shrugged. "It's all right, but you should really watch where you're going." "Sorry," Salva repeated, and after a moment's silence he turned away and began searching the crowd again. The boy was still looking at him. "Your family?" he asked. Your family shook his head. "Me too," the boy said, and he sighed, and Salva heard that sigh all the way to his heart. Their eyes met. "I'm Salva." "I'm Mariel. It was good to make a friend." So again, Salva has that hopeless feeling or trait where he can't find his family, and he's kind of feeling hopeless about it. Mariel was the same age as Salva. They were almost the same height, and when they walked side by side, their strides were exactly the same length. And the next morning, they began walking together. "Do you know where we're going?" Salva asked. And Mariel tilted his head up and put his hand on his brow to shade his eyes from the rising sun. "East," he said wisely. "We're walking into the morning sun." Salva rolled his eyes. "I know we're going east," he said. Anyone could tell that. But where in the east? Mariel thought for a moment. "Ethiopia," he said. "East of Sudan is Ethiopia." We looked at the map and looked at the country of Ethiopia next to Sudan. Salva stopped walking. Salva stopped. "Country, we can't walk all the way there." "We're walking east," Mariel said firmly, "and Ethiopia is in the east." "I can't go to another country," Salva thought. "If I do, my family will never find me." I'm thinking Salva's pretty anxious. When a problem comes his way, he gets really wound up and anxious. Mariel put his arm around Salva's shoulders, and he seemed to know what Salva was thinking, for he said, "It doesn't matter. Don't you know if we keep walking east, we'll go all the way around the world and come right back here to Sudan. Then we'll find our families." Salva had to laugh. They were both laughing as they started walking again, arm in arm, their strides matching perfectly. More than a month had passed since Salva had run from his school into the bush. The group was now walking in the land of the Atout people. In the Dinka language, the Atout were called the people of the lion. Their region was inhabited by large herds of antelope, wildebeest, and gnus, and the lions that preyed on them. The Dinka told stories about the Atout. When an Atout person died, he came back to earth as a lion, with a great hunger for the human flesh he once had. The lions in the Atout region were said to be the fiercest in the world. Nights became uneasy. Salva woke often to the sounds of roars in the distance, and sometimes the death squeal of an animal under a lion's claws. One morning he woke bleary-eyed after a poor sleep, and stumbled after Mariel as they began walking again. "Salva?" It was not Mariel who had spoken. The voice had come from behind them. Salva turned. His mouth fell open in amazement, but he could not speak. "Salva!" A couple of things. I wonder who is calling Salva's name. I also want you to imagine what it would be like to sleep in this region every night. How would you sleep?